So, welcome, Angie
Thank you.
Chaplin, one of the most amazing Leadership Challenge certified masters in the world, for being here today. It's a bit of a coffee chat called Legends Lead On. And the goal is just to capture some of your wisdom and knowledge and experience from all that you've experienced with companies, with individuals, just with the Leadership Challenge in general. So, thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Fabulous to have these conversations, and especially with you as a like-minded individual who has traveled this journey. So, yes, always enjoy these opportunities.
Yes, well, I always feel like I will be always indebted to you for helping me push through with my research. And so I need to thank you again for that.
Of course.
So I'm going to get started and just ask you what first drew you specifically to the Leadership Challenge and what made it stick for you?
It was a really easy sell for me. And it was back in the mid 2000s in graduate school. And it was the first textbook of the first program that I was enrolled in at Seton Hall University. So it wasn't like it was trying to be sold, but like many people, I was a working adult. So I did my graduate studies later in life after I already had a couple of decades of work experience behind me. And, like many, it was going into, another leadership book, another management book. And right away, I knew that this book, The Leadership Challenge, was going to be different. And it didn't take long for me to understand that for the first time, Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner were telling us that not only was it okay for a leader to understand the facts and the feelings, that feelings were a significant part of leadership. And that's really what drew me to the content, was that it was data driven. I have this kind of I love research, I love data, but I also love relationships. So it was that integration of research based, but it was also about relationships. The fundamental belief that leadership is a relationship. And in my practice of it, that relationship has to begin with one's self, which of course leads into model the way, but really from that first experience of diving into the leadership challenge, it was the hybrid of facts and feelings as being part of what an exemplary leader looks like.
I love that. I love that. I love the evidence-based research and looking not just at any book, but recognizing that this is based on all of the research from Jim and Barry, and then it also including being a human being and having emotions and having relationships and recognizing how important all of that is.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what's a moment in your career where you saw the five practices truly change a team, a leader, or even an organization?
I had the wonderful fortune of working for a very visionary leader in the nonprofit sector. So at the time that I was introduced to the Leadership Challenge, I was working for, at that time, the largest statewide nonprofit organization in Iowa. And we were an organization that provided health and human services for children and families who are going through some difficult situations. And as I was kind of studying my own leadership journey and understanding what that looked like, the CEO of the organization challenged me to create a leadership academy.
Mhm.
And at the time, it was very unheard of in the nonprofit sector to build leadership, right? Nonprofits, with their limited funds, are dedicated to delivering services to people who need them. So there was very few, if any, opportunities to really invest to a extensive degree on workforce development or leadership development. And as she said those words, Leadership Academy, something just grabbed hold and would not let go for me. And at that point, as I again went through my graduate studies, parallel to that, I was looking at how do we take the five practices and incorporate them into an academy model. After I completed my graduate studies, I was invited back as a faculty member so that I was teaching the leadership challenge for Seton Hall University in their graduate program. And so that further enhanced some of the academic perspective and being able to adapt that to an academy model that was also built on a curriculum. So I proposed a year-long leadership academy that the organization would offer at no cost to its employees. And we had probably 300 employees at that time. And much like a learning cohort within an academic setting, I set a cohort style format that 20 people would be accepted. And employees had to apply to get into the Leadership Academy. They had to have approval from their supervisors. It was like a 3 or 4 page application because I knew how important this opportunity was and how serious that our organization was taking leadership, not just as, something that, hey, it's just a cool extra thing to add to your resume, but really a set of skills to embody to make you better at leading yourself and making a greater impact for the people who are relying on you, including the children and families that we were serving. So within that year-long model, we again went through the application process and had 20 employees go through the Leadership Academy at a time. Each month, we met for 1 day-long session.
Mm-hmm.
And during that day, we focused on one of the five practices. And of course, over the course of the year, we would, on some of the months, we would focus on a practice more often. But I was able to tie different topics that were more supervisory in nature. So, for example, active listening. We had a topic on active listening that we would incorporate into Inspire a Shared Vision, because Inspire is a lot about communication skills.
Right.
And often we forget that listening is a piece of the communication process.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really taking five practices and the 10 commitments and 30 behaviors, and then building in additional topics, all related to one of the five practices. So after we had, I think the first year of that academy, I had feedback from supervisors that a year was too long, that they wanted folks to be ready to step up into leadership sooner. So then I created an additional version called the Emerging Leaders Program. And it was an accelerated model that the content stayed primarily the same, but the delivery was in an accelerated 3-month period of time. So we would meet for a 3-day offsite retreat, and then they would have a 6-week strategic leadership project that they would work on within the organization. And then we would meet at the end for another 3-day closing retreat. So within that format, as well as the 12-month Leadership Academy, in total, we graduated over 100 employees from the LSI Leadership Academy. And one of the greatest takeaways for me personally, because many of these individuals are friends, as well as professionally, is that a significant number of those individuals have gone on to lead nonprofits of their own. They're CEOs, they're executive directors, they're, leading initiatives that didn't exist when we did this in, the mid 2000s. And just to know that, it was having a visionary leader, which inspired me to put together a leadership academy, having two amazing authors like Jim and Barry put together the Leadership Challenge, which I was able to then incorporate into a nonprofit learning management really experience. That really, it's kind of been a ripple effect that now we have more empowered nonprofit leaders, not only in the state of Iowa, but some of them have gone on to hold state positions for other states, federal positions. And it was just a really significant opportunity for me to put together this type of program, but then also to see the type of impacts that it has for the people who experienced it. And that is one of the examples that I always go back to as a personal best leadership experience when talking about some of the opportunities that I am so grateful to have had as part of my affiliation with the Leadership Challenge.
I feel the pride and the humility as you say that, just beaming, you're glowing with pride there.
Yes, it's pretty powerful to think about that type of impact, especially like I said within the nonprofit sector. They don't have the luxury of a lot of access to professional development and leadership development in the same way that their corporate counterparts might have. So it was an opportunity really, thanks to a visionary leader who said we need to do more with building up our bench strength so that we can do a better job of leading not just our organization, but the entire nonprofit sector in Iowa.
I would love to know more about how you use the LPI in both the situation you talked about with the 12-month and also with the accelerated leadership program.
Yes, we used the LPI toward the end of the program. At that point, it wasn't the LPI 360 plus.
Mhm.
Now, with the book ended, one in the beginning and one in the end, hadn't yet rolled out yet. And so we just used the LPI once. And I asked them to take it probably in the 12-month program. It was really about month 7 that they took it so that they already had some exposure and practice with the 5 practices, but yet it gave them a springboard of what to do next. So their graduation from the Leadership Academy was the creation of an LGAP, a Leadership Growth Action Plan, where they had to, based on their LPI feedback, choose which strategies they were going to implement, what their action steps were going to be, how it aligned with their values, how it aligned with their DISC styles, what their accountability partner system was going to look like. And then they had to present that to the rest of the group. So that was their graduation. So not only did they, of course, take the LPI and then reflect on that, but they were, reflecting on it to the point of presenting it as a leadership growth action plan to themselves, to their accountability partner, to their supervisors, and then ultimately to their peers in the program on the final days. So it became a valid way of saying, you've done a lot. Let's celebrate your progress. And let's make a point of celebrating what you've learned to this point and how that can be a catapult into the next era of your leadership growth.
Yeah, and as you were talking, Angie, just the power of the LPI, I probably should elaborate for those who aren't masters. The LPI is a leadership practices inventory, which is 30 behaviors related to the leadership challenge, including the 5 practices and recognition of where you are as a leader with those behaviors. I'm curious if you found a creative or powerful way that you've seen the LPI used to activate individual or team development.
Using it as and creative, I don't know, might be a misnomer here, but we would use it. I would tie it to within the Emerging Leaders program. I would tie it to their strategic leadership project. So in the Emerging Leaders Program, that's when we had kind of the 3 days in the beginning, the 3 days in the end, and then kind of 6 to 7 weeks in between. So within those 6 to 7 weeks, it was really about identifying a project that needed done for the betterment of the organization that would help them improve the frequency of one of the behaviors,
Right.
one of the practices, of course. So it was just kind of connecting those dots that it really can be relevant in how you set up an action plan for yourself. It's not just, I'm going to set up a SMART goal and I'm going to follow the letters and make sure I have it all. It's, I'm going to focus on this practice and this particular statement. And here are my action steps. And this is how it fits into this bigger project. So then it was a little bit easier for them to gain momentum, to say, I'm going to ask people for feedback because I'm establishing a benefits committee and we want to explore bringing in new benefits to our organization. So I need to specifically ask others, get other diverse thoughts. And I mean, there's so many ways that they could pull in specific LPI behaviors and make it part of one of their action items, that it would just, something that they could work on intentionally, but it wouldn't feel so unnatural to them that it was awkward. Learning new things is going to have some awkwardness to it, some uncomfortability within that schema until they get more used to it. But it was, trying to get them to embody these behaviors more as I do this because it's going to lead to better outcomes, not just as checking a box.
I love that. I love that. I'm curious, did you have them in with accountability buddies like
Yes.
within the cohort?
Yep.
And was there any surprises as far as how accountability buddies help one another to become more accountable?
No, not really. We did it. They even throughout the program, they would have different. I would randomize who they're working with. If they're doing a presentation, sometimes I would use like different different clothes. Like anybody who's wearing green, you have to partner up with somebody who's wearing red, just to randomize things and to make it kind of fun. People would have candy buddies. So I would count out like Hershey's and Snickers and count it out so that there's so many and so many, so they have to find the person who has the same candy as they do, and then that's their candy buddy, which becomes like their peer accountability partner. So they would have other opportunities throughout the year where they're not just working with one person the entire 12 months, so that they get exposure to more diverse thoughts and opinions and ideas, beyond their silo or their scope of their particular job, for the purposes of their leadership growth action plan. They needed to focus on an individual, and this was more self-selected, an individual who they felt would definitely help them
Mhm.
be accountable. And I let them choose what that looked like. I didn't prescribe you have to have lunch once a month or you have to have so many coaching calls, or anything like that. I wanted them to own that piece of it. And then after they completed the program, I did do a 30-day check in with everyone in the program, just to see how things were going, what roadblocks came up that they didn't anticipate, what progress were they able to make, did some barriers come up, whether it was budget or whether it was just unforeseen detours that needed to be taken. But other than that, it was really, peer to peer support that allowed their continued growth really, after the end of the program and the honeymoon's over, they've got to create some of their own accountability.
Wow. Wow. Any surprises? Did you contact them by email or was that in coffee chats
A
online in
little bit of
person?
both. Some of them were by email. Most of them I tried to do either in person or by phone. So at least it was more, back and forth interaction. It was a statewide organization, so not everybody could I match up with in person, but try to do as much as I could in person. And I still do, even with I do a lot of coaching in the higher ed environment these days, and still with nonprofits, but to connect even with them on LinkedIn, not per se as an accountability partner or a follow-up coach, but to just say, hey, if they share something, to comment on it and to say, oh my gosh, what a great example of encourage the heart, just to
Love that.
be a reinforcement of the five practices are living, breathing around us all of the time. And sometimes it's easier for me to see that because I've been invested in and practicing and learning and really doing all the things within the purview of the five practices for a very long time. But just to remind them, that as they're cheering something or sharing something that they're working on, to bring it back to the five practices, and really from a neutral third party being able to reinforce what they're doing within the context of the leadership challenge.
Yeah, there's so much. It's so rich. It's so amazing how relevant it is to every
Yes.
day, to everything you do. I
Yep.
love how you connected the dots and said, okay, what are you working on and what
Yeah.
behaviors are attached to that? And how can you meet with people, whether it's a candy buddy or
Yep.
whatever, so that you're still working on it.
Yes.
So, speaking of the LPI is just, and so leadership practices inventory for people that don't know what that is. The LPI is an incredible tool, and we know that when people take that assessment and they get, ideally 10 to 15 people to give them feedback on, whether it's from the church or from wherever, on specific behaviors, and they go through that. And if you have you come across a time where you were doing an LPI debrief, where you really gleaned some insights that you can share with us? So not just on numbers, because we know if people start, okay, this person is at an 8 point whatever, and they've moved over next year to a 9, we want to celebrate that, but just something beyond the numbers.
There was a situation when I was doing some government contract work, which can be particularly tricky with the FBI and when perceptions come into play. And it was a fairly large team. We were doing a subset of the overall team with I think it was a 6 person executive leadership team at that point. And the head of the department had originally contracted with me to try to reinforce leadership behaviors with those individuals who reported to him. And so that initial consultation really grew into a multi-year engagement with this department. And within the department was another staff person who kind of became almost a co-conspirator, so to speak, or a co-facilitator with me. And so some of the things that we were able to uncover within conflicting behaviors, both within the LPI data side as well as DISC and some of the other supporting documentation and assessments that we used, it really came down to behavioral style conflicts between the head of the department and the next level of the department.
Sure.
And when we made recommendations to the head of the department, again based on data, and made some suggestions and some recommendations, um, things didn't things didn't change. And then we learned a short time later, so the we made our recommendations, and then kind of the engagement, went on, we ended we said what, we did our thing, we said what the recommendations were, and that was it. And then not long after that, the head of the department resigned and moved on to a different position. And just in kind of debriefing with my internal colleague who was kind of part of this process, it was really that through the LPI we were able to uncover some things about the leaders' infrequency in demonstrating the behaviors that the leader was really not willing to do much about. And so, in that lack of willingness, certainly would have continued to struggle with relationships with the people within the department. So I think, that's there can be some great success stories, and there can be, the truth is in the truth is right there. And that's one of the powerful things about the LPI. But for a leader to see and to understand that based on the feedback through the LPI, that the leader needs to improve the frequency of treating people with dignity and respect, and, behaviors that definitely are essential to strengthening relationships and improving leadership culture. And I think that leader was surprised that he wasn't viewed as highly in the eyes of his counterparts as he thought he was. And, it led to him making some different decisions, which, was beyond my control as a consultant or really anybody within the department. But that was a pretty powerful, eye-opening piece of information, piece of data for any leader, to see, oh, these are the things that I think I'm doing really well on, but they're not landing in the way that I think they are for the people around me. And the majority of the time, a leader will take that feedback and decide what to do with it in a positive way.
Right.
To take action, for this particular leader, yeah, I'm kind of speechless. It was just a situation where he did not feel, whether it was willingness or ability or readiness, to make changes in his style to better increase the frequency of his behaviors with the folks that he was working with. So that stands out as one of the most interesting experiences, at least specific to the LPI data, that, was unexpected or a surprise that came out of it. You could say it strengthened the team. It made definitely changes in having to bring in a new department head, to lead after that. But yeah, that's, if you get feedback, and like we say in workshops, feedback is a gift.
Yeah.
You don't have to like it, but it's a gift, and it is what it is. And you need to understand that this is the feedback of the people around you, and their perception is their reality. So it's up to me as the individual leader to either do something about it or don't. And there are consequences, positive and negative, to both sides of that choice. And that was pointed out very directly to me in that particular situation.
Wow, that's incredible. So this human being decided, okay, so for example, people are not rating me that I'm treating people with dignity and respect. and instead of doing something about it, I'm gonna move on.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I guess that is a choice. I wonder, I'm a bit of a stickler as far as data, and I like to have, I tell people, if you have under 10 people chiming in on your frequency, you're not getting good data. And I've watched leaders so regret only inviting, just getting a sliver of data compared to if they had opened it up and really listened. So you can get more, and then you're gifted with more feedback, and then you can check the trends. Because if you only got three people, and to your surprise, none of them liked you,
Yeah.
that's not good data.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah.
I love it when, we get to see the choice points that human beings make. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if that person might have just been having a really hard time. You never know what's going on with a human being. And there
Yeah.
may be more to it. So what do you think? How do you recommend integrating LPI results into an organization's ongoing leadership development strategy?
Obviously, that's not an easy one sentence answer to that question because leadership is multi-layered and multifaceted, right? So it needs to look at what is the culture as it is today,
Right.
right? What's the current state? What's the ideal state? What are the gaps? Is there a skills gap where leaders have never they're in positions to lead and have never been taught how to lead, have just
Oh,
been
it's high.
they've assumed positions as they've grown in tenure, but have never learned the ability to build relationships and to really how what that looks like, from a leadership versus a management expectation. So yes, there needs to be so much better understood. I think the approach that I take is, where what example is being set from the top
Right.
and kind of better understand that. And what, again, are we okay with the example that's being set at the top? If we're not okay with that, then that's where we need to start. If we are okay with that, or maybe mostly okay and just need a few tweaks, then it can be a multi-tiered approach where it's cascaded through the organization. Many times, I work with, again, universities, and they will have an executive leadership academy, but it's open to staff at all levels, whether they're faculty and academic administrators, or whether they're, working in dining services. It doesn't matter what their level is in terms of an organizational chart. And when taking a strategic approach at a leadership academy, having that type of engagement structure where it's not just relegated to the top or the middle or the lower layers, there is involvement throughout. It strengthens those interdepartmental relationships. It breaks down silos. It improves one department knowing what the other department is doing. My specialty, I guess, and probably my personal preference is to build some type of a curriculum, that it's not just a one-time event where, I'm going to come in and do the leadership challenge workshop and yeehaw, it's going to be wonderful. And then I leave and then nothing changes
Right.
and nothing happens.
Everything's going to change in 3 days.
Right, exactly. And so it really is taking a holistic approach at the leadership challenge workshop is just a piece of the strategy. What else needs to be done, whether it's coaching built in or whether it is, quarterly sessions of folks getting together and talking about one of the 5 practices. Yeah, I wish I had a better way to describe, what that looks like as an answer to your thoughtful question, because it I think a lot of organizations do make the assumption that we'll just bring in a consultant or bring in a speaker or a facilitator and that's going to fix everything. And that's a very short-sighted approach that doesn't get at the root of whatever the situation is. A lot of times organizations are focused on the symptoms. We have poor communication, or we have people aren't showing up on time, or we're not having productivity, and so they focus on that symptom without getting at the root cause. And knowing the source is essential to really having a sustainable solution. And sometimes that is more of an academic approach that builds a curriculum around what is it that we need to do on a more frequent scale to address these types of things.
Yeah, wow. You're so right. Instead of the one and done, okay, we'll come for a couple days in a workshop. Let's really look at the problems. Is it employee engagement? Is it communication? Is
Yep.
it, whatever it may be, and how can we get to the root? And then at the end of our time together, whether it's, 6 months or a year or whatever it may be, measuring and proving and showing that, we've shifted, we've shifted and we're proud and we're going to continue this shift. Yeah, I get that. And is there any organization where you've watched the shift happen and you were just so incredibly blown away by what they did?
I would say in the 10 years that I was at the nonprofit here in Iowa, it was present there. We didn't have the measures in place to have really the quantitative data that I would have liked from a sophisticated learning management process. We just didn't have one. So it was much more qualitative, just in things that I saw, and stories that were shared and relationships that were continued. But in today's world, with the metrics and measures and technologies and surveys that are in place, kind of in this reiteration of implementation, there's a much greater opportunity to measure those outcomes. And I think that really helps us look at what does the leadership challenge do to overcome, whether it's a skills gap or it's ineffective relationship building or it's engagement, or I mean there's a myriad of symptoms again that can be addressed once we better understand what it is we need to address.
Exactly, exactly. But excuse me, I'm coughing. I had an organization, it was actually a school where they blew me away because they they integrated it so deeply. They were doing it with so many people that was incredibly unexpected. Did you ever have anything where they just lit up like fire and did something that was unexpected? Keep going. I'm gonna grab a drink real quick. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think to what extent we were able to do it within the nonprofit organization. And there were certainly opportunities there where at the end of the year or at the end of the retreat, there were presentations that blew me away where they had engaged with community organizations and really had expanded not only their ability to lead themselves and within their department, but had really grown their influence in terms of pulling in others from the community. And that might mean they were putting together a new service model or getting ready to go into the schools and talk about bullying, or just again see themselves with more confidence and more competence, which then allowed them to have the courage to open up and to do more things as a result. So it's more on a not so much organizational scale, but more on an individual leadership scale, where I saw those moments of just being blown away with where an individual leader was able to not just embody it, but really embody it and allow it to ripple out to touch other people.
I love that. I want to ask you a rogue question related to the individual. So I know a lot of people that read the Leadership Challenge and love it, and then they say, "So what else can we do?" I'm curious what your response would be for an individual that had a book club and read the Leadership Challenge, loved the Leadership Challenge, maybe they don't have the access to going to the workshop, taking the LPI. What would you say to them if they're thirsting for that knowledge, something that they could do to move forward?
There are all kinds of activities, of experiential, hands on activities that can help advance the behaviors associated with all five practices. And some of these, one can recreate themselves. You can buy pretty inexpensively a workbook of the Leadership Challenge workbook that can be almost a self study guide as you work through the book, whether as part of a book club or on your own. Certainly engage with their values and better understand on a more deep level what are those values. One of my favorite things to do, and I do this with groups, I do this personally every year, is I make a values based vision board. So, usually at the end of December, kind of between Christmas and New Year's, I will make a vision board, but it will be based on my five values that have been identified through, the values card sort that we do as part of Model the Way. And then I go old school and get recycled magazines from the public library and get my glue and my scissors and kind of sequester myself into a craft room and create something like that. So it's really trying to brainstorm some of those ways. Well, how can you live the five practices? What can we do to help you explore what challenge the process looks like in real life? When you go, instead of doing your normal routine, instead of having your typical rituals of what you do first thing in the morning or what you do before going to bed, try mixing it up. I mean, that is a way to challenge your own process.
True.
And so there's, depending on the nature of the person and more specifically what they're looking for, there are a lot of, you know, easy to implement ways of just experimenting with living the five practices on a day-to-day basis and what it looks like to operationalize those commitments and those behaviors just on, every ordinary day. What's a way that I can encourage somebody's heart more frequently today? Oh my gosh, there's hundreds of ways to do that throughout the course of a day. And so it's usually those types of mini challenges that I'll put forth to someone who wants to engage more deeply in the five practices and try to pique their interest in taking it to the next level.
I absolutely love that. And I could talk to you all day. And that is a great note to end on what an individual can do to challenge themselves, to dive into the five practices, the 30 behaviors, the commitments, and do something, either in a book club or doing even more than that, just Googling all the different things that you could do. So thank you, Angie, for a fabulous discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yes, always. Likewise. Appreciate you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm going to end the recording, and thanks to all of those who are listening and watching.